Hey, welcome to another exciting edition of the Give Me Liberty podcast, the Standing for Freedom Center at Liberty University, where we defend life, liberty, and truth to ensure the foundations of freedom exist for the next generation. Why are institutions so important? Do they really matter? Should we protect them and save them for future generations? When we think about institutions, oftentimes we're looking around at a cultural landscape. Things change over time. There are challenges, and sometimes institutions from the first, second generation lose their way in the third and the fourth and the fifth generation. And one of those things that we oftentimes talk about or look at is things like the Southern Baptist Convention, Association of Churches, largest Protestant denomination in North America. And today we're interviewing a nominee for the annual convention's president. That would be the president of the SBC if this person is elected, and that is Pastor Tom Ascol. He is the pastor of Grace Baptist Church and the president of Founders Ministries. All of this on the Give Me Liberty podcast, starting now. Hey, welcome back to the Standing for Freedom podcast, and I'm joined by special guest today. A conversation I've been wanting to have for quite a while is Pastor Tom Ascol. He is the senior pastor of Grace Baptist Church in Cape Coral, Florida.
Cape Coral, yeah.
I always want to say Coral Ridge, but no, Cape
Right.
Coral. And then also you are the president of Founders Ministries. Welcome.
That's right. Thanks so much, Ryan. It's good to be with you, and look forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Well, I as I know, and as many know who follow what's going on, this conversation surrounding the Southern Baptist Convention, you have been nominated. You are running for president of the convention at the annual meeting in June. For those who are listening, Pastor, who don't know anything about the Southern Baptist Convention, can you just give us a quick overview?
Sure. The Southern Baptist Convention is the largest Protestant denomination in North America, and it's comprised of more than 47,000 churches that have 14 million-ish members in those churches. It's been very involved in the impact that it has on the evangelical world in America. And what I like to say is that even if you're not Southern Baptist, the Southern Baptist Convention, if you're a Christian in America, most likely impacts realms in which you affiliate, because we educate in our 6 seminaries 1/3 of all seminary students in North America. And it's the largest missionary sending force in the world. And so it's quite likely that if you're a conservative evangelical church, that you're going to be influenced by, at some level, the role and the ways of the SBC. And of course, I want the SBC to be as healthy as possible, because a rising tide raises all ships. And if the SBC is not healthy, then the opposite of that also is true.
Yeah, it has a huge influence on culture. I think about the fact, too, you are a local church pastor. You've been pastoring that church over, 36 years? Is that right?
That's right. I've been 36 years, June 1st.
Okay, amazing. And so when you look at your congregation and the experiences that you have had as a senior pastor, what are some, maybe some of the biggest challenges of a local church pastor in 2022 versus maybe when you started in ministry?
Yeah, well, the biggest challenge is the same, and that is dealing with my own heart every day, and making sure that I'm seeking the Lord and dealing with my sin and remembering the gospel and all the things that every Christian has to deal with. But in terms of ministry, the world has changed, and I like Aaron Wren's article that he published at the American Reformer about how we've gone from a positive world up to about 1994, where it was a positive thing to be a Christian in America, into a neutral world from 94 to about 2014, where it didn't really, no plus but no real minus, to now we're in a negative world. And it is a detriment to be a faithful Christian in our culture today. You are getting pushback. You're being accused of being a fascist. I got that this morning already before breakfast. And a bigot, other things. And so you can't look at the world the same way that you did 30 years ago. And if our people are not being mentored, discipled, taught to think rightly about how the gospel applies in every culture, in every situation. So it's not that we're without armament. It's not that we're without instructions. It's just we need to understand that the ground has shifted beneath us, and we need to apply the gospel as rigorously today in this negative world as we did in the positive world or the neutral world.
Yeah. Very well said. I haven't seen that article, but I would love to go and read that. I would agree that we are in a moment, a unique moment now in our short history as a nation, where culturally, yes, I mean it's a liability to be a Christian. We went from sort of hagiography and writing about our past, Christian founders or founders that were influenced by Christianity. We oftentimes hear, Pastor, the Judeo-Christian tradition, but this was a Protestant nation for such a long, long time. And it was only, I think, in the 1960s that we've had our first Catholic president. And then as we march forward now, we're becoming a largely unaffiliated, unidentified nation. I think according to George Barna research, less than 6% of Americans have what you could call a biblical worldview.
Right.
So that is quite a challenge. I just want to talk real fast, too, about you are the president of Founders Ministries. How does that interact with your church at Grace Baptist, and then how does that interact with the larger convention?
Yeah, well, our church has a wonderful relationship with Founders. This is an organization that's been around for 40 years. We're committed to the recovery of the gospel, the reformation of local churches. And with that, we supply all kind of content. We try to resource pastors and church leaders with as much content as we can. So we published a journal for well over 35 years now. We publish books. We have conferences. We got a national conference coming up in January, the 19th through 22nd in Southwest Florida, where we're going to be addressing what is man, which goes to your previous question. 40 years ago, even people who did not believe in God at all or think about him knew what a man was, knew what a woman was. But you can no longer assume that, because we now have a Supreme Court justice who says, well, I'm not a biologist. I can't tell you what a woman is.
Yeah.
So that's just one more indication that the church has to call attention to these basic realities that extend from Genesis 1:1, that this is God's world, he created it, and what he says a man is a man, what he says is right, good, and true, that's what they are. So Founders is committed to that, and we've been teaching that, and again, the church is a great encouragement to that ministry, but it's Founders is way after the church in terms of my own priorities. And we grew up, the Founders Ministries it came about as a result of Southern Baptist guys getting together. There were 7 of us in 1982, had a prayer meeting. And the result of that was everything that we now have with Founders. But it's not a Southern Baptist organization. We shoot for Baptists because we are Baptists, but we extend way beyond the borders of Baptists. And we really have been involved internationally as well. We've got wonderful contacts in South America, Africa, Asia, Europe as well, just trying to encourage pastors and churches.
Yeah, I have been so grateful to that ministry, your ministry there, because even as a seminary student, read many of your resources. I'll say even in my journey, I was entering seminary in the mid-2000s. I think there was a book that came out maybe in 2003 by Tom Nettles, 2004, Why I'm a Baptist. It was very helpful. I look even more recently, I think the documentary that y'all put forth, I think it was in 2018, 2019? 19.
Mm-hmm.
By What Standard? And I wanted to talk a little bit about that as well. And one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on is to talk about some of the challenges that we're seeing, not only in our culture, but in the Southern Baptist Convention at large. It seems as though, I heard this the other day. It used to be, and this is in politics, that the factory floor defined what happened in the Democratic Party. Now it's the faculty lounge. And that's shaping the way in which, the thinking is today. In most political circles, it's gone from the forgotten man to forgetting what man is. And it's interesting because even in the SBC, there tends to be this feeling that It is no longer run by pastors. It's not a denomination run by pastors, but a denomination that is run by professors. And by the way, I love professors, okay, so I'm not disparaging them, but it's school teachers that is running the convention, largely from those seminaries that you named in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, I think that's not just perception. I think that is reality in many respects. And we see the disconnect between those who lead the entities and agencies of the SBC. The Southern Baptist Convention owns 12 entities and agencies. Most well known are the 6 Southern Baptist Seminaries, International Mission Board, North American Mission Board, and the Ethics and Religious Liberty Council. And all of those are owned by the churches. We built them, we paid for them, we pray for them, we send our trustees from our churches to hold them accountable. But what's happened over the last many years is that trustee system has been broken, and the trustees now, in many respects, regard themselves as the PR departments of the entities to represent the entities to the churches rather than holding the entities accountable to the churches. And we've seen that most egregiously this week with a bill that came out for a debate and possible passing at the Louisiana state level to give equal protection under the law for preborn children. And the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, together with 69 other so-called pro-life organizations, came out against it. And they said, oh no, we don't want to criminalize abortion. You know, that's not right. That's not pro-life. And the acting president of the ERLC, Brent Leatherman, signed that open letter in complete defiance to the will of the messengers that overwhelmingly passed a resolution in 2021 at our annual meeting, saying that we will work for and insist upon the equal protection under the law of preborn babies. And so that's just another example. Will of the people clearly, unequivocally stated, and the elitist who leads one of our entities says, I don't care, we're going to go 180 degrees opposite that.
Yeah. Yeah, very well said. I was shocked at the names that were on that letter. Now, I know that the response, I think, more recently has been, no, we don't. The purpose of that letter was to say that we don't want to criminalize mothers. It was being misconstrued, you know, this, that, and the other. You know,
the letter's not unclear. The letter is not unclear. It's simple English. The grammar makes perfect sense. They said what they said. Now, if they didn't mean what they said, they need to repent and say, okay, sorry, we misspoke. But that's not what they said.
That's becoming a big challenge more recently, as just clear, effective communication. The last few years, you know, at the annual meeting, there's been a lot of shenanigans. And of course, you're from the floor, and I'm talking about different resolutions that are brought forth. There's a resolution committee. I'll be honest with you, you know, it gets very confusing for somebody who's watching it kind of from the outside looking in, how all this stuff works. But going back to Resolution 9 that was passed, I think it was in 18 or 19. You said 19. 19. Mm-hmm. Your documentary kind of exposed how that happened. And Resolution 9, for those who are watching, don't know what that is, that's the one where basically critical race theory was deemed an analytical tool, almost like a helpful social theory of analysis that could be useful. You know, it was almost like a stamp of approval, you know, not a Surgeon General's warning on the box like, be careful, but rather like, hey, this is a safe product, we've tested it, go ahead and use it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a disaster, both in its content and in the process whereby it was thrust upon the convention, because the original resolution submitted by a messenger in California was to decry and denounce critical race theory. The resolutions committee took that, rewrote it 180 degrees opposite of what it originally said, and set it forth to the convention saying these are useful, helpful, analytical tools. Several of us tried to overturn it or get it amended so that it would not be so onerous, and the platform just simply slapped that down, and the convention voted to pass that resolution. And I've talked to countless numbers of people who said, we voted for it, we didn't know what it was, we just trusted the platform. And you trust leaders. I mean, you want to trust leaders, but right now, so many of our leaders are proving themselves untrustworthy. And the Resolutions Committee for the last several years is case in point. Again, last year, there was a resolution submitted by 1,300 Southern Baptists. Never before in the history of the SBC has that been done. 1,300. They wouldn't even bring it out. And it was on critical race theory and intersectionality, saying, as the presidents of the Southern Baptist seminaries have said, that those ideologies are not compatible with the Baptist faith and message, the statement of confession that the convention has adopted. And the Resolutions Committee wouldn't even bring it out. And then they argued against the resolution that the messengers finally overruled them to pass about calling for the immediate end of abortion. So there's a disconnect. There's a big disconnect.
And when we're talking about a resolutions committee, for those again who are listening, we're talking about a very small select group of people picked long before that meeting comes together, right? And then from the floor, those who show up to the convention are voting on what has already been carefully curated and then presented to them, correct?
That's correct. And that resolutions committee is appointed by the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. One of the reasons I've allowed myself to be nominated is because that resolutions committee has been so disrespectful and just, I don't think they've done a good job at all the last few years. And I would like, if God puts me in that position, to have the opportunity to appoint those who will be responsible and sensitive to the will of the messengers on that committee. But yeah, the committee has the authority to reject and not bring out resolutions that are submitted to them, to write their own resolutions, or to amend, as they did so radically in 2019, Resolution 9, any resolution that is submitted.
Well, I want to turn real quick, a series of tweets that you actually put out yesterday. I agreed largely with what you were saying with regard to how the political conversations have kind of happened or not happened from the pulpit. What's ironic, I have felt somewhat gaslit over the past few years, not from CNN or MSNBC, certainly not from the White House chief spokesperson, not from Twitter, but actually gaslit from some of our pulpits. And I don't mean the average pulpit in America, or maybe the average pulpit even in the Southern Baptist Convention, but rather from those that would be deemed or considered, Pastor, the elites. That have kind of been the guys that speak on the conference circuit, if you will, the blue check marks that have tweeted for years about feigning this kind of political neutrality. Meanwhile, we have transgenderism, we have critical race theory being taught in schools, we have puberty blockers, you name it. We have sex education as early as 5, 6, and 7. That's happening in our public school system. We have parents who are better theologians, it seems, out there in the public square than their own pastors, who are saying, no, that's not really happening, or pay no attention, just focus on the gospel. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, there's so many levels to everything you just described. On the one hand, as I've tried to argue, we have lost our moral reasoning. We've lost our ability to reason morally. And so you get some pastors, like in the SBC, or some leaders will say, look, well, the Baptist faith and message isn't being violated. The Baptist faith and message doesn't say anything about transgenderism. The Baptist faith and message doesn't say anything about XYZ, so therefore we can't say anything. On the other hand, you get people saying, oh, you used to be, and this is a conversation I've had recently multiple times, Tom, you used to be all about theology, you used to be about contending for theological concepts, and now you've become completely political. And it's just like you're a Trumpist or something. All these accusations get thrown at you. And my response is, no, look, Jesus Christ is Lord of everything. He's Lord over the voting booth. He's Lord over politics. The people who serve in governmental offices are his deacons, according to Romans 13. That's the literal word there. They are deacons appointed by God. And it seems to me that we have forgotten this reality that the gospel calls upon all of us to obey everything that Jesus Christ has commanded us. And I'm beginning to say more and more, do you realize one of the most political statements ever made is Jesus Christ is Lord?
Amen.
I mean, our forefathers had their heads rolled down Roman roads because they refused to say Caesar is Lord. And yet today, subtly, we're being coerced by many to say that the state is God. The state, whatever the state says, we must do. And we just lost it. We've lost our ability to think clearly, or so many have, so many of our leaders that are in charge of institutions and agencies. And I just want to appeal to them, say, brothers, let's go back and read Genesis 1:1. Can we just meditate on Genesis 1:1? I think it's the most important verse in the Bible right now, that this is God's world, and he is the ultimate authority. Jesus said, I have all authority in heaven and on earth. Well, what that means is the authority that I have as an elder or pastor of a church, the authority president has, is delegated authority. It comes from God. And whenever I use authority that's been delegated to me in ways that are contrary to the one who delegated it, I am outside the boundaries of my responsibility and authority, and I need to be called into question, and I need to be resisted. We see that in cases of husband and wife. We're very sensitive to that today, rightly so. We see it in churches. If elders become overbearing, well, they need to be called to account. But it's like when you get to the government, it's, oh no, we can't. Whatever the government says, they say we can't meet, we can't meet. They say we got to get shot, we got to get shot. It's just crazy that
Yeah.
we have so disconnected the Bible's teaching on these things from practical living day by day.
I know on that alone, I could ask you hours worth of questions just on that. And I even thought of a few, and I want to have you back on, Pastor, to talk a little bit more about this, because I totally agree. And I would say even that secularism has done a far better job of discipling pastors in K through 12. By the way, by the time they get to seminary, they're already thinking like Maoists and they don't know it. That's a whole other conversation that we could get into. But they believe in the supreme and absolute authority of government, that Caesar truly is king, and that Jesus Christ isn't Lord over all. But we'll save that for another conversation. But let me ask you this final question. For the folks who might be listening and thinking, are these institutions really important? The SBC is big, but isn't it kind of a dinosaur, if you will? It's the way we used to do organizations. We don't do organizations the same way anymore. We probably need to just recognize that it's probably far too big, far too tribal, balkanized, if you will, to really bring everybody back together. What would you say to that? What would your hope or encouragement be in that?
Yeah, well, several things I need to say as preface. One is certainly, God doesn't need the SBC. The kingdom of God is going to go on. The promises of God will be kept with or without these types of organizations like the SBC. But as I said earlier, the SBC does matter, and it's going to matter for good or for ill, just like the PCUSA matters for ill today in the doctrines that it promotes and the policies that it tries to support, just like the United Methodist Church. And it's not going away. If all the good churches leave the SBC tomorrow, it's not going to end. It's going to continue just by virtue of inertia. And then in addition to that, Christians must remember, we serve a God who raises people from the dead. So you say, well, it can't happen. It's too far gone. Well, I think that's a statement of unbelief. Now, it may not happen. I don't know. I'm not a prophet, but I do feel the weight of stewardship as a pastor of a Southern Baptist church. And I would just plead with all Southern Baptists, especially pastors, own the stewardship of your association. Because if you're going to be Southern Baptist, you need to be one who is faithful and holding the institutions that we built and pay for accountable to the will of the people as we seek Christ together and try to live under the authority of his word. If you can't do that, then I don't know why you would want to be Southern Baptist. Don't continue to fund something that's going to become an instrument in the hands of the devil. Don't do that. We've seen it happen. Those two illustrations I just gave, there are multiple more. And if we're going to be in this, let's be in it together. Let's get to Anaheim this summer. It's a 2-day business meeting. Change doesn't happen without getting to that business meeting. And it's time for us to change the direction in the SBC.
Very, very well said. Well, time is short. Pastor, thank you so much for jumping on. Really appreciate you and your ministry and your witness, your public witness to so many, both inside and outside the SBC. And we're certainly praying for you and for God's will to be done in Anaheim in just a few weeks.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate being with you today.
Hey, thank you for watching this conversation. There are a lot of conversations out there that certainly do matter in the larger sense of what's going on, in the country, certainly what's happening in our denominations. I count Pastor Tom Ascol among the best when it has to do with not only the gospel and when it comes to theology, but certainly even public theology in the public square and understanding how the church should be engaged with culture. Thank you for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, share this post with a friend. Only a true friend would share the Give Me Liberty podcast. Until next time, God bless you.